Hello everyone! All the fancy super tournaments are over, so before the candidates start we have plenty of time to explore some old classics, as that's where the real fun lies. Here I said I would analyze this game quite some time ago, plus it was suggested by a lot of people. This is the game from the very strong New York tournament of 1918, and like I said, in those days every tournament was strong and every tournament was famous. It was supposed to be an 8-player double round robin, but in the end one of the players got sick, so they had to make it a 6-player 2-round robin. And already in the first round of this very strong tournament we have the famous game Jose Raul Capablanca playing against Frank James Marshall. A lot of you probably already heard about Frank Marshall either through his variation, the Marshall attack, a variation of the Ruy Lopez, or maybe you've heard about his famous game against Stefan Levitsky, the American Beauty, where according to legend people started throwing gold coins on the board after seeing Marshall's amazing move. If you haven't, I will put a link in the description below. I also made a video about that game, so feel free to check it out. In that game I also said a bit more information about Frank Marshall, so I'm not going to be introducing him in this video. So let's see this game. It's quite an amazing game, and Capablanca opens with e4. And according to legend of this game, Frank Marshall actually saved this variation, his famous Marshall attack, for 8 years. He didn't want to play it against anyone, and he was saving it for a worthy opponent. And who is a worthy opponent if not the great Cuban Jose Raul Capablanca? Now, there are some stories that some people already played this idea, but there is no way of telling if Marshall ever heard about these games or if Capablanca ever heard about these games. So as far as we're concerned, this is the first time Capablanca sees the Marshall attack by Frank Marshall himself. And it's very interesting how he deals with it over the board while the clock is ticking. So e5, we have knight to f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez. a6, Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, knight to f6, and here we have castles. Bishop to e7, now rook to e1, b5, bishop has to go to b3, Marshall castles, and this is the position. Here, now it's known that if you go c3, you're inviting the Marshall attack. If you're not comfortable playing against the Marshall attack, you can play a4, this prevents the Marshall attack, or even h3. I will come back to this later if you want to see why this stops the Marshall attack. So c3, Capablanca plays this, although he never actually faced the Marshall attack, so he's not inviting it, but this is the first time in history someone is playing the Marshall attack. In this game now in New York in 1918, here Marshall plays his famous d5, and this is the variation he's been saving for 8 years, as the story goes. So e captures on d5, knight captures on d5, knight captures on e5, of course, knight captures, rook captures, and here we have knight to f6. Now it's considered stronger to play pawn to c6, defending the knight on d5, but in Marshall's original preparation, knight to f6 was the idea. And here Capablanca immediately plays rook to e1. He doesn't want to wait for bishop to d6, and he wants to get that h3 pawn ready as soon as possible. So bishop to d6, we have h3, and this seemingly stops ideas like knight to g4, but this is actually what Marshall planned. So he plays knight to g4 now. And already you have to take a lot of things into consideration. First of all, can you capture the knight? Well, let's try. If you play h captures on g4, you get queen to h4 now, with some terrible threats of bishop captures on g4, queen to h2 check is coming, bishop to h2 is possible, a lot of things to consider. So rook to e4, not allowing the bishop to capture the g4 pawn, also making room for the king, sort of an escape route if needed. So queen to h2 check, king to f1, queen to h1 check, king to e2, and now comes queen captures on g2, attacking the rook on e4. d3, defending it, but now comes bishop captures on g4. Rook captures, queen captures, you have to move, and this is pretty terrible for black. His king is wide open on e2, the rooks are coming into the game. It's considered to be a much better position for black. So after this knight to g4, Capablanca didn't capture the knight, but of course he didn't know this. This wasn't known theory at the time. He played queen to f3. This is considered to be the best move, and of course Capablanca found it over the board. Here queen to h4, and now again there is a question: can you capture the knight now while the queen is already on f3? Well, let's see. If you play h captures on g4 now, now we get bishop to h2 check, and here you have the option of going maybe king to h1 or king to f1. Let's try king to h1. If king to h1 is played, then you get bishop to f4 check. This is very important as it prevents the king from reaching e3, and also it prevents the queen from eyeing the f7 square. So after the king moves, okay, you can also block it with the queen, but if you play queen to h3, you lose immediately after queen captures on f2. This attacks the rook, and after rook moves, now you get a rook to e8, and there is no defense against rook to e1, check and mate. So instead of playing queen to h3, you have to go king to g1, but now queen h2 check, king f1, queen h1 check, king to e2, and now rook to e8 check. King d3, and now rook captures on e1. Queen captures on f4, and now queen to f1 check. If you go king to c2, you get rook captures on c1. This is checkmate. And if instead of king to c2, you try something like king to d4, then, I mean, your king is on d4, simply bishop to e6, preventing all ideas white had on the f7 square. And white really doesn't have anything to play. He can't develop any of the pieces, but he has to if he wants to at least play this game. So after, let's say, knight a3, you can play bishop captures, pawn captures, and now simply capture on c1. Rook captures, queen captures, and now it's actually black who's up in material. You're up the exchange, and also this knight is stranded on a3, can't go anywhere. So a winning position for black. So that's the idea. If you capture it, and after this bishop to h2 check, the king goes to h1. Another idea you can try is king to f1, but king to f1 also doesn't work because bishop captures on g4, and after queen to e4 you get bishop to f4. Problem is you can't capture the bishop or anything because queen to h1 is checkmate in 1. The bishop is covering the e2 square, and after g3 there is queen to h2 now. G captures on f4, and now bishop to h3 check. Only move is either you move the queen and lose the game, or you have to play king to e2. And after you go king to e2, then comes rook to e8, and you lose the queen and the game. So a lot of things to consider here, and you can see how well prepared Frank Marshall was for this game. So after queen h4, Capablanca doesn't capture the knight, instead he goes d4. And d4 is a crucial move when playing against the Marshall attack, especially in an old variation like this, because it will allow one move that Capablanca also found on the board, over the board. I will not tell you now which move it is, but you will see it in this game. It's quite a move. So here we have knight captures on f2, and again, Marshall poses a lot of problems for Capablanca here. Can you capture it? Can you capture the knight? If you play queen captures on f2, then you get bishop to h2 check. And I've played a lot of games, especially in blitz, and people often can make a mistake of the idea is bishop to h2 check, but some people play bishop to g3 immediately, probably people who only started playing the Marshall attack. But after playing bishop to g3, it looks like you've pinned the queen and the rook, but if you play this, your entire world will crumble before your eyes as white plays queen captures on f7. This comes with check. Unfortunately, if you play king to h8, queen captures on f8 is checkmate. If you capture the queen, then rook to e8, and this is checkmate. The rook is pinned from the bishop on b3. So if queen captures on f2, then black has to play bishop to h2 check first. Now if king to h1, you simply capture the queen on f2, and if king to f1, now you play bishop to g3, and now queen captures on f7 doesn't work because rook captures on f7 comes with check. The king is on f1 now. So here, queen to d2 probably, and after bishop captures on h3, g captures on h3, queen captures on h3, and queen to g2, you can simply capture, capture, and bishop captures. And here you have a rook for a knight and a bishop, and black is up 2 pawns. This is considered better for white, but you know, finding all of these moves over the board wasn't that clear for Capablanca. So instead, after this knight captures on f2, Capablanca didn't capture. Instead, he played rook to e2, now attacking the knight with the rook, and also not making the rook on e1 a target if the knight ever moves, as the queen was eyeing that rook on e1. Here, bishop to g4, and here again posing a lot of problems for Capablanca. What do you do here? Well, your first idea is h captures on g4, but let's try capturing the knight first. For example, if you play queen captures now, then you get bishop to g3, queen to f1, and now bishop captures on e2, queen captures on e2, and now rook a to e8, and it's all over. The rook is coming to e1, there's no stopping this. You can prevent it with e3, bishop to e3, but now queen e4, and you can't prevent the queen from capturing the bishop on e3. Knight a3, queen captures with check, queen captures, rook captures, and that is it. Black is up the exchange. The pawns are even, but black being up the exchange, winning this game easily. So after bishop to g4, Capablanca finds the strongest refutation over the board, and the strongest is the one you first thought about, probably h captures on g4. But again, this took a lot of calculation, and you really have to consider what to do here. Here, bishop to h2 check was played. We have king to f1, and now bishop to g3. The threat is, of course, queen to h1 checkmate. So rook captures on f2 had to be played. We have queen to h1 check, king to e2, and now bishop captures on f2. And here, if you play, it's a very delicate position once again. If you play queen captures on f2, you get queen captures on c1, and now rook to e8 is a terrible threat. Now this will be very bad for black. Another thing you could do after bishop to e2, you could play king captures on f2, but this would actually result in a draw. After queen captures on c1, and let's say queen to d1, now black has an easy draw, as he can always check the white king on e3, f4, and h6. Doesn't matter where the king goes, even if he goes h1, queen h6, he has to go back. So this is the moment where Capablanca found the amazing move over the board, and this is why I told you why this d4 move is very important. Now you have this bishop to d2, and this stops all of black's threats. It creates a nice escape route for the king, either through d1 to c2 or through d3 to c2. So a very nice move. Bishop to h4 was played, as now there really was a danger of capturing the bishop. Now king can capture the bishop, or queen can capture the bishop. If you play rook to e8 check, there is no more any ideas of back rank mates or anything. For example, if rook e8 check, king can capture, now queen can come to e1 and deliver checkmate, because the bishop on d1 is guarding e1. So a very nice move by Capablanca, definitely. Bishop to h4, getting the bishop out of harm's way, and now queen to h3, offering a trade of queens. Marshall, of course, cannot afford to trade queens, so rook a to e8 with check, king to d3, and queen to f1, again delivering check, and king to c2. And Capablanca had to see all of this, the bishop d2 move and the king walk, probably from the start of the Marshall attack, probably all the way from knight to g4, to be able to play a game like this. Here we have bishop to f2, queen to f3, simply paralyzing that bishop. We have queen to g1, and now bishop to d5. c5, now Marshall has to open up lines of attack for his rooks, as if the king stays on c2 and Capablanca manages to develop his pieces, it's all over for black. D captures on c5, bishop captures on c5, and b4 now by Capablanca. Bishop to d6, and now a4. We have a5, a captures on b5, a captures on b4, and rook to a6, attacking the bishop on d6. We have pawn captures on c3, knight captures, and bishop to b4. But simply b6, here Capablanca starts pushing his passed pawn, and this will prove to be deadly. We have bishop captures, and now h6, making some room for the black king, but Capablanca simply pushes b7. Here we have rook to e3, and here bishop captures on f7, and it's all over. Doesn't matter what black plays, everything loses. If you try something like king to h8, you get rook captures on h6. This is checkmate. The pawn is pinned from the bishop on c3. If you play rook captures bishop, then you get a pawn to b8 queen. King has to move, and then you simply play rook captures on h6 with check, and it doesn't matter what you do here. If you capture with the pawn, then queen captures is checkmate. If you capture with the king, then you get queen to h8, king g5, and queen to h5. This is checkmate. One other thing, after bishop to f7 you can try is maybe king to h7, but then you get queen f5 check, and after pawn to g6 simply queen captures on g5. So after bishop captures on f7, anything black does ends in a very nice checkmate, so there is nothing for Marshall here to do other than to resign the game. So yeah, this is the famous game where the Marshall attack was used for the first time by Frank Marshall himself. Legend has it, like, he saved it for 8 years to test it against a worthy opponent, and Capablanca passed the test over the board. A lot of players have been using the Marshall attack, and it's been improved. Marshall's original version has been improved. There, a lot of ideas for white have been found, and for black also. It's quite an enjoyable opening to play for black, as black always gets a lot of activity. But it's useful if you play it against someone who doesn't really know what he's doing, and those people will probably play an anti-Marshall attack move. They will not push c3, like I said, in that position. In this position they will not go c3, inviting the Marshall, but if they don't want to learn how to play the Marshall, they will simply go h3 and a4. And I said I will say why h3 doesn't really work, because now if you play d5 and we go into the same variation of the Marshall, let's say knight f6, d4 now, bishop to d6, and rook to e1. Now the idea of knight to g4 doesn't work. As you can see, although it's not a very big difference. The pawn is on d4 instead of on d2, and this pawn is on c2 instead of on c3. But this actually makes a whole lot of difference. Now after queen to f3 and queen to h4, now white has the option of playing rook to e8. And the reason why he didn't have this option in the original game, where c3 was played, is because now that the d4 has been played, this bishop can come to d2, and it will serve as a mean of defense against any rook to e1 threats. So now after queen captures, knight captures, you will have to capture on f8, bishop captures, and now simply king captures on f2, and you are up a piece as white and winning this game. So yeah, if you enjoy this, you have to be prepared for c3, h3, and a4 as well. But it's a very rich opening, so you can brush up on this on your own if you're interested in the Marshall Gambit. One other thing I wanted to show you was the standings after this tournament, after the double round robin. These are the standings. We have Jose Raul Capablanca in first place with 10.5 points out of 12, with 9 wins, 0 losses, and 3 draws. So, crushing the field. He didn't lose a single game. Frank Marshall got third place here with 6 wins, 4 losses, and 2 draws. And in second place we have the famous Serbian Grandmaster Borislav Kostic, or as they call him, Bora Kostic. Also finishing the tournament without a single loss, 6 wins and 6 draws. So although he played a very nice tournament, he couldn't really reach Capablanca with so many draws. But yeah, definitely a worthy result. So yeah, that's the game. I really wanted you to see this game. It featured a lot more lines than my usual videos because this is a really famous game, and it's the first time it was played, so all of the variations matter. You know, as he did really prepare for this game. It's a shame he lost, but then again it shows what a great player Capablanca was. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, probably with another nice classic.